When we think of crime bosses, names like Al Capone and John Gotti might come to mind. But did you know that some of the most powerful crime bosses in American history were black? Their stories are often untold, buried beneath the more famous names. So why don't we hear more about them? Is it because their lives challenge what we think we know about power, crime, and race? Join us as we discuss the hidden world of black mob bosses, men who rose from poverty and racism to become leaders in the criminal underworld. Let the countdown begin. To start things off, we have Jeff Fort at number 10. Do you ever wonder what it takes to control an entire city? Jeff Fort did just that. Born in Mississippi in 1947, Jeff moved to Chicago as a child, where life wasn't easy. Growing up poor and surrounded by gang violence, many young men like Jeff turned to the streets for survival. But Jeff wasn't just any street kid. He was a natural-born leader. In 1959, at just 12 years old, Jeff co-founded the Blackstone Rangers, a street gang that would later be called the Black Pea Stones. He didn't want to just be a gang leader. He wanted to unite all the gangs, and he did. But Jeff wasn't just about violence and crime. He had big dreams for his community. He got government grants for youth programs, but behind the good work, there was a darker side. His gang controlled drug deals and used their power for illegal activities. Number 9. Frank Lucas. If you've seen the movie American Gangster, you already know a little bit about Frank Lucas. Born in North Carolina in 1930, Lucas moved to Harlem and became one of the most powerful drug lords in American history. But Frank Lucas wasn't just any drug dealer. He had a unique plan. Instead of buying heroin from middlemen, Lucas went straight to the source. He traveled to Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War and made deals with suppliers there, smuggling pure heroin back into the US using military planes. It's hard to believe that, right? A single man outsmarted the government and built an empire that stretched from Asia to America. By the early 1970s, Frank Lucas was making millions of dollars a day. But, like many of the mob bosses we've talked about, his success didn't last. Lucas was eventually arrested and spent years in prison. One interesting part of Frank Lucas's story is his relationship with the police. After being caught, Lucas became an informant, helping the police take down other drug dealers and corrupt cops. Was he trying to save himself, or did he feel some guilt for what he had done? And what does his cooperation say about loyalty in the criminal underworld? Number 8. Guy Thomas Fisher. There's this saying, every mighty king was once a crying baby. Guy Fisher was just like any other boy growing up in Harlem, New York. He dreamed of a better life, but in the 1970s and 80s, opportunities were limited for young black men in his neighborhood. Guy got involved in petty crime at first, but soon he was working with one of the biggest drug dealers in Harlem, Nikki Barnes. Fisher quickly became rich and powerful, controlling the heroin trade in New York City. But power comes with a price. Fisher's rise to the top led him down a dangerous path. He was part of a massive drug ring that made millions, but the law was always watching. Eventually he was caught and sent to prison for life. What makes his story even more interesting is that while in prison, Fisher became a scholar and wrote books. Number 7. Stephanie St. Clair. Can a woman rule a man's world? In the 1920s and 30s, Stephanie St. Clair showed that she could. Born in Martinique, she moved to Harlem, New York, and quickly became the leader of a criminal empire. Back then, Harlem was a rough place, and most of the crime was run by men. But St. Clair wasn't afraid. She took over the numbers game, an illegal lottery that made her millions. St. Clair was known for being tough, but she also fought for her people. She spoke out against police corruption and used her money to help the black community. Still, the police and rival gangs tried to take her down. Number 6. Leroy Nikki Barnes. Imagine being so powerful that people called you Mr. Untouchable. That was Leroy Nikki Barnes. Born in 1933, Barnes grew up in Harlem and became one of the biggest drug lords in the 1970s. He was smart, confident, and knew how to stay out of trouble, at least for a while. Barnes ran a massive heroin empire, and he was so sure that he couldn't be caught that he appeared on the cover of the New York Times magazine smiling. But even the smartest criminals make mistakes. Barnes was eventually betrayed by his own people, leading to his arrest in 1978. But here's the twist. After being sent to prison, Barnes decided to cooperate with the government and testify against his former friends. This move shocked everyone because he turned on his own people. Does this make Barnes a traitor? Or was he just doing what he had to survive? Number 5. Freeway Rick Ross. In the 1980s, when crack cocaine took over American cities, one man seemed to be at the center of it all. Freeway Rick Ross. Ross wasn't just a small-time drug dealer. He became one of the biggest crack cocaine dealers in the US, making millions of dollars. What's crazy about Ross is that he wasn't your typical criminal mastermind. He didn't start out with a plan to take over the drug world, but he was smart, and he saw an opportunity. By the time the government realized how bad the crack epidemic was, Ross was already at the top, but his success didn't last forever. Ross was eventually caught and sent to prison. While in prison, he discovered that the government had secretly helped the drug trade by allowing cocaine into the country to fund wars in other nations. This led to a huge controversy. Ross was either a victim of a bigger system or a man who made bad choices, raising the question of how much responsibility he should take for the damage caused by crack cocaine. Number 4. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Have you ever heard of the Godfather of Harlem TV series? That title belonged to Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, one of the most powerful crime bosses in Harlem during the 1930s and 40s. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just about making money, he was about respect. Born in South Carolina in 1905, Bumpy moved to Harlem when he was young and quickly became involved in the criminal world. He worked with the Italian Mafia, but also looked out for his own community. Bumpy helped poor families, provided protection, and was seen as a hero by many. But like many crime bosses, Bumpy's good deeds were mixed with illegal activities. He controlled the heroin trade and was feared by many. Number 3. Raymond Washington. Raymond Washington was just 15 years old when he founded the Crips in Los Angeles in 1969. How does a teenager start one of the most famous gangs in the world? Growing up in a tough neighborhood, Raymond wanted to protect his community from other gangs. But what started as protection soon turned into something bigger. The Crips became one of the most feared gangs in America, involved in drugs, violence, and crime. But Raymond Washington never wanted it to be that way. He wanted respect and power, but the gang he started got out of his control. Raymond was killed at just 25 years old, leaving behind a complicated legacy. Number 2. Larry Hoover. Larry Hoover's story makes us wonder if a man who built a criminal empire became a force for good. Born in 1950 in Jackson, Mississippi, Hoover moved to Chicago when he was young. Like many others growing up in rough neighborhoods, he got involved in gang life early. By the time he was 20, Hoover was leading the Gangster Disciples, one of the most powerful street gangs in the US. Under Hoover's leadership, the Gangster Disciples grew into a massive organization, controlling drug trade across Chicago and beyond. But Hoover wasn't just focused on crime. He started to see himself as a leader of the black community. While in prison, he tried to rebrand the Gangster Disciples as a political group called Growth and Development, promoting education, peace, and social change. Despite Hoover's attempts to reform, many believe that the gang was still involved in illegal activities. Today, Hoover is still in prison, serving multiple life sentences. Number 1. Frank Matthews. What if I told you one of the biggest drug lords in American history just disappeared one day? Frank Matthews did just that. Born in North Carolina, Matthews grew up poor, but he had big dreams. He moved to Philadelphia, then to New York, when he became a major player in heroin and cocaine trade in the 1970s. Matthews wasn't like the other drug dealers. He was smart, and he knew how to avoid trouble. By the early 1970s, he was controlling drug distribution across the US and making millions. But unlike other mob bosses, Frank Matthews didn't die in a hail of bullets, and he wasn't caught by the police. Instead, in 1973, he vanished. He fled the country with $15 million, and to this day, no one knows where he is. It's incredible to think that one of the most wanted men in the country simply vanished. Frank Matthews went from being on top of the world to completely disappearing, and his current whereabouts remain unknown. And most importantly, where is Frank Matthews now? As we've seen, the lives of these black mob bosses are complicated. They were powerful, they were feared, and they made millions. But they also lived in a world of violence, crime, and danger. Some of them tried to help their communities, while others were only focused on their own success. Now, what do you think? Should these men be remembered as criminals, or is there more to their legacy? Let us know in the comments below. We hope you enjoyed watching the video, and if you did, please like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.